Chapter 1. The Boy from Hasenstadt. There are legends that begin in castles, under banners and crowns, and there are others that rise from ash and frost, from villages so small that the world never learns their names. Victor von Doom was born in one of those places, a gray scar on the map of Latveria, a nation tucked between the Carpathians, haunted by history and superstition in equal measure. The year was never clearly recorded. The calendars of rural Latveria were unreliable, their winters long, their summers cruel. What is known is that on a night when the wind cut like a blade through the valley, a Roma witch named Cynthia von Doom gave birth to a son inside a caravan lit by one dying candle. His father, Werner, was a healer, a man of quiet hands and endless patience, and he held the infant as if the world itself might break him. Cynthia whispered an old Romani blessing over the child's brow. "You will never kneel." It was a prophecy and a curse. The Von Dooms were wanderers, mistrusted by Latverian nobles, and hunted by soldiers loyal to Baron Vlad Tepes Dracul, whose rule at the time had turned the countryside into a prison of taxes and fear. Cynthia's magic, real, wild, untempered, became both their survival and their doom. She made pacts with unseen spirits to protect her people, but one night she reached too far. In a desperate bargain with Mephisto, she sought power enough to free the Roma from oppression, only to discover that devils always collect. Her spell consumed her, and by dawn, Cynthia von Doom was dead, her soul bound to the infernal realm. Victor was 4 years old. Werner gathered him and fled into the mountains, carrying guilt heavier than any satchel. Years passed, marked by snow and hunger. Werner tended to the sick in small villages, never charging more than a loaf of bread. Victor watched him mend wounds and bones, learning both anatomy and empathy. Yet in the boy's heart, love began to twist into rage. He heard stories whispered by old women of his mother's witchcraft, of how she had sold her soul to darkness. When he asked his father if it was true, Werner would only say, "She did what she thought was right." That answer was not enough. When Victor was 10, the Baron's soldiers arrived in Hasenstadt to collect tribute. A noblewoman had fallen ill, and Werner was summoned to heal her. He knew the disease was beyond medicine, yet he obeyed. Refusal meant death. The treatment failed, and the Baron's vengeance was swift. Werner and Victor fled into the forest, pursued by hounds. Snow fell, heavy and relentless. Werner's lungs froze before the dawn. His final act was to wrap his cloak around his son, whispering, "Live, my boy, live free." Victor promised he would. By morning, the boy who would become Doom walked alone through the woods, his father's body left behind beneath the frost. He returned to Hasenstadt weeks later, hardened by grief. The villagers saw something different. In his eyes, something sharp, something ancient. He scavenged what little remained of his parents' wagon, scraps of parchment, fragments of metal, his mother's amulets. In the nights that followed, he began to build. Machines of copper and bone, devices that hummed with unstable energy. The villagers feared him. They said he spoke to spirits through wires. They said he dreamed in equations. They were right. Victor had discovered his mother's hidden texts, grimoires filled with symbols that blended science and sorcery. He devoured them, translating every rune, every formula. He believed he could do what she could not, open a gateway to the underworld and reclaim her soul. At 16, he succeeded, almost. The device he built was a lattice of gears and sigils powered by stolen electricity from a nearby factory. When he activated it, the air split open. Through the rift, he saw flames, chains, and the faint outline of a woman reaching for him. But the energy surged beyond control. The explosion destroyed half the village, leaving Victor miraculously alive but scarred. His face, once pale and proud, bore the first traces of the mask he would one day wear, not of metal, but of shame. The Latverian authorities arrived to arrest him, but instead of punishment, he received an unexpected visitor, a delegation from America. Among them was a man from Empire State University, offering Victor a scholarship. His crude invention had drawn international attention. To the world, he was a prodigy. To himself, he was a failure who had glimpsed hell and lost his mother again. Accepting the offer was not ambition, it was strategy. In America, he would find the knowledge that Latveria could not give him. At ESU, Victor von Doom became both legend and ghost. His intellect eclipsed every peer. Professors spoke of his mind with awe and fear. One student, Reed Richards, dared to approach him, not as a rival, but as an equal. They shared nights of debate over quantum equations and dimensional theory, each pushing the other toward genius. Yet where Reed saw discovery as wonder, Victor saw it as weaponry. "Science is the key to freedom," he once told Reed, "but only if you have the will to turn it." In the basement of his dormitory, Doom built again. He refined the design that had once failed him, crafting a new portal meant to pierce Mephisto's realm. Reed noticed a flaw in his calculations, a misalignment that could destabilize the entire system. He tried to warn Victor. "You need to recalibrate the section," Reed said. "The feedback loop could—" "I need no one's correction," Victor snapped, "least of all yours." Pride is a silent poison, and Victor drank deeply. When he activated the machine, it imploded. The explosion threw him across the lab, scarring his face beyond repair. He was expelled the next morning. Shunned by academia, his spirit curdled into fury. He blamed Reed for the failure, convinced that Richards had sabotaged him out of jealousy. Victor left America with nothing but the clothes he wore and a hatred that would outlive empires. He wandered through Europe, then Asia, searching for forbidden knowledge. In the high plateaus of Tibet, he found what he was looking for: a secret order of monks who practiced both science and mysticism. He arrived half dead, frozen and starving, and demanded they teach him. They refused. He stayed outside their gates for days until the abbot relented, saying, "Only a man who has conquered death may learn to command it." For years, Victor studied under the monks. He mastered their arts and fused them with his own. He built armor of his design, an exoskeleton forged from enchanted alloys, capable of channeling both energy and will. When it was completed, he placed the mask, still molten, upon his face. The metal seared his skin, but he did not scream. Pain was purification. When he emerged from the forge, he was no longer Victor von Doom. He was simply Doom. He returned to Latveria not as exile, but as conqueror. The old baron had grown complacent, his armies weak. Doom rallied the oppressed, weaponized his genius, and stormed the capital. Within a week, the monarchy fell. The castle of Doom rose in its place, a citadel of cold iron and eternal flame. From its highest tower, the new ruler addressed his people. "You will know peace," he declared, "because I will tolerate nothing else." The world soon learned that the boy from Hasenstadt had kept his promise. He would never kneel. Chapter 2. The Rise of Doom. When Victor von Doom returned to Latveria, the land barely remembered his name. Years of tyranny had drained it of will. Its people whispered rather than spoke, bowed rather than lived. The mountains surrounding the capital were gray and cold, carved by centuries of fear. But on the horizon, the dawn that broke was not golden, it was metallic. The banners of Baron Drakel fell that morning, replaced by the crest of a new ruler, a steel mask over a green mantle, the symbol of a man who had turned pain into armor. The coup was swift, almost surgical. Doom's technology was decades ahead of Latveria's primitive armies. He marched through the capital not as invader but as destiny fulfilled. Soldiers surrendered before he spoke. The people, terrified yet awed, watched a man become legend in a single day. When he stood on the palace balcony, smoke rising behind him, he declared in flawless Latverian, "I am Victor von Doom, rightful son of this soil, and from this day forth, Latveria will kneel to no nation, no god, no man but Doom." To the outside world, it seemed an act of madness, one man seizing a nation. But to Doom, it was restoration. In the months that followed, he remade Latveria with the precision of an engineer and the vision of a monarch. Feudalism dissolved overnight. Industry flourished. Crime disappeared, not through reform but through fear. He built machines that harvested energy from the earth, hospitals that healed wounds without medicine, and schools that taught both logic and loyalty. He replaced the clergy with scientists, the nobles with engineers. Every citizen had food, warmth, and safety. In return, they gave him obedience. From his throne in Castle Doom, Victor ruled with a paradoxical heart. He spoke of compassion while building weapons that could level continents. He insisted he was no tyrant, but his word was law. He never sought to be loved, only understood. Doom does not crave worship, he told his advisors, only recognition of truth. And in his mind, the truth was simple. The world was broken because it was ruled by fools. He would fix it, not for power, but for perfection. The scientific community watched in fascination and horror. Doom's inventions defied comprehension. Time platforms that could bend history, armor that could channel cosmic energy, and androids, his Doombots, that mimicked him so perfectly that even his enemies couldn't tell which Doom they faced. To the world, these were threats. To him, they were order. It was in this age of rebuilding that the name Fantastic Four first reached his ears. News traveled fast even to Latveria, a team of explorers transformed by cosmic radiation, hailed as heroes in America. Reed Richards, their leader, was a name Victor had hoped never to hear again. But destiny, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. The rivalry that had begun in a university basement now spanned continents. Reed represented everything Victor despised: humility, optimism, the belief that power should serve rather than rule. Doom considered that philosophy naive. Richards builds for discovery, he once told his generals. Doom builds for dominion. Their first confrontation would define them for decades. Doom, seeking proof of his superiority, kidnapped the Fantastic Four and demanded they serve him in retrieving the treasures of Blackbeard the pirate, a test meant to humiliate them. But Richards, ever resourceful, turned the trap into victory. When Doom's time platform malfunctioned, sending him tumbling through the centuries, the world believed he was dead. He returned days later, unscathed, his fury magnified. From that point forward, their conflict became eternal. Intellect against intellect, ideology against ideology. Doom would call Reed the one blemish upon my destiny. Reed would call Doom the man I could have been had I lost my soul. In those years, Doom's reach expanded beyond Latveria. He forged alliances with despots, manipulated monarchs, and outwitted secret agencies. Yet every conquest, every triumph seemed hollow without Richard's acknowledgement of defeat. Doom's obsession grew into a philosophy. If the world will not admit my genius, it will be forced to live under it. But Doom was not without code. Unlike the villains he was often compared to, he had honor, a concept as inflexible as his armor. He kept his promises, no matter how cruel. He spared children and respected courage. He despised lies, even his own. When he failed, he admitted it, though always with the vow, Doom will learn. Doom will return. His sense of nobility made him unpredictable, his morality alien yet precise. There were times when he fought not for conquest, but for principle. When Namor the sub-mariner sought to wage war against the surface world, Doom allied with him not for power but for respect. When cosmic threats like Galactus loomed, he stood beside heroes he loathed, because even Doom understood that annihilation benefited no one. And yet, behind the mask, the boy from Hasenstadt never left him. His nightmares were filled with his mother's screams. Every night, he relived the moment her soul was dragged into Mephisto's realm. That wound drove everything. It was not greed that fueled his empire, but grief. He believed that through mastery of science and sorcery, he could one day march into hell itself and reclaim her, and he did. In a rare alliance with Dr. Stephen Strange, Doom ventured into the infernal dimension. Together they confronted Mephisto, a battle of will and wit that tested even Doom's boundless pride. Strange fought for balance, Doom fought for love. Against all odds, they succeeded. Doom freed his mother's spirit, though she rejected him at first, unable to recognize the man her son had become. It was only when he knelt, for the first and last time, that she touched his face and whispered forgiveness. When Doom returned to the mortal world, he was changed, not softened, but complete. The ghosts that had haunted him since childhood were finally silent. Still, peace eluded him. The universe had a way of tempting Doom with mirrors, reflections of his own potential, often twisted. The Sub-Mariner, the Black Panther, Tony Stark, all men of intellect and will, all destined to cross paths with him. Doom respected them, sometimes even admired them, but he trusted no one. All alliances are temporary, he told himself. Only Doom endures. His experiments grew bolder. He tapped into the power cosmic, wrestled with time itself, and once even stole the Silver Surfer's abilities to challenge Galactus. For a brief moment, he stood above gods. And when that power overwhelmed him, he admitted defeat not to the universe, but to his own humanity. Even perfection, he murmured, is imperfect in mortal hands. By the 1970s, Doom's reign over Latveria was absolute. The United Nations debated sanctions, but the country's people refused to rise against him. Foreign agents who visited reported a strange truth. Under Doom, Latveria was prosperous, safe, even content. There was no hunger, no crime. Children studied physics before they learned prayer. And though they lived under tyranny, none dared call it suffering. Doom's presence was both prison and protection. In his mind, he had achieved utopia. Yet one truth gnawed at him like rust beneath the armor. Reed Richards still lived. Doom could conquer Earth, could command gods, but as long as Richards drew breath, the victory was incomplete. Their rivalry became almost sacred, a cosmic dance of creation and destruction. Reed would save the world, Doom would rebuild it. Each needed the other, though neither would admit it. When asked once why he never simply killed Richards, Doom gave the only answer that made sense in his philosophy. To kill a man is to end him. To defeat him is to prove him wrong. By the dawn of the modern era, Doom had transcended his beginnings. He was no longer merely a villain or ruler. He was myth. His armor was legend, his intellect unrivaled, his name feared even by celestial beings. The world's heroes learned that where Doom walked, history followed. And in the silence of Castle Doom, as snow fell across the Latverian mountains, Victor von Doom sat alone at his throne, staring into the embers of the forge where he had been reborn. Doom has conquered kingdoms, he whispered to the fire, but the only empire worth ruling is the self. Outside, the bells of Hasenstadt tolled, the same bells that had once rung for a dying boy and his father in the snow. Now they rang for a god. Chapter 3. The monarch and the monster power was never a stranger to Victor von Doom, but divinity, that was something he had only ever studied, never tasted. In the decades following his rise, the monarch of Latveria became a constant variable in the equation of the world, a man whose intellect brushed the edge of the divine. His inventions grew stranger, his motives more opaque. Sometimes he sought conquest, other times salvation. The world never knew which Doom it faced, the tyrant, the savior, or the scientist. Yet all roads led inevitably to the same truth, Doom's hunger for control over a chaotic universe. The turning point came not on Earth, but beyond it, when the fabric of reality itself bent under the hand of a being who called himself the Beyonder. In an instant, heroes and villains alike vanished from their worlds, summoned to a patchwork planet built from fragments of countless realities. Its name was Battleworld, and among the assembled gods and monsters, Doom stood apart, not merely as a participant, but as a man who would one day rule even this impossible place. On Battleworld, Doom observed, the Beyonder, omnipotent yet naive, wished to study mortals, to see what they would do if offered their heart's desire. Others fought blindly for survival, for power, for love. Doom studied the god himself. He watched, he learned, and in time he acted. Where armies clashed, Doom built. Where heroes argued, Doom calculated. When the opportunity arose, he struck, not with force, but with intellect. He stole from the Beyonder what none believed possible, the source of his power. For a brief, terrible moment, Victor von Doom became the most powerful being in existence. The stars bent to his will, galaxies whispered his name. He remade his ruined face, banished his scars, and stood not as man nor monarch, but as a god reborn. Yet even omnipotence could not silence the echo in his mind, his mother's voice, his father's promise, the boy in the snow. With all the cosmos in his grasp, Doom discovered that the one thing he could not command was peace. When Reed Richards and the heroes confronted him, it was not through strength that they triumphed, but through faith. Doom, in his infinite power, began to doubt himself, and in that doubt, the stolen divinity slipped away. The Beyonder reclaimed what was his, and Doom fell from the heavens. He returned to Earth, changed but not broken. To the world, he was the same armored ruler. To himself, he was something else, a man who had touched godhood and found it wanting. For a time, he withdrew from the stage of history, focusing inward on Latveria. He rebuilt what Battleworld had cost him, redesigned his Doombots, and fortified his borders. He still spoke of destiny, still sought the perfection of humanity under his rule, but now there was calculation tempered by contemplation. He began to experiment not just with machines, but with minds. His greatest experiment came years later, during what the world would call the Emperor Doom era, when he discovered that brute conquest was inefficient. Humanity could be ruled not by fear, but by serenity. Using the mutant called the Purple Man, whose pheromones could control thought, Doom constructed a global device that soothed the will of humankind. Overnight, war ended, poverty vanished, the skies cleared. For one perfect month, Earth was at peace, and Doom ruled it quietly, benevolently, absolutely. He walked through the streets of Latveria without armor, watching children play, hearing laughter without suspicion. For the first time, he thought he had succeeded, but perfection without choice is still tyranny. The Avengers broke the spell, dismantling the device, and when Doom's peace dissolved, he did not rage. He simply stood among the ruins of Utopia and said, they would rather suffer than obey. Even in failure, Doom evolved. His understanding of power deepened beyond politics or magic. It became philosophical. He began to view the universe as a flawed equation, one that could only be solved through discipline and unity. But Doom's unity always meant obedience, and so his war with chaos continued. During the cosmic crises of the era, the rise of the Beyonder once more, the Secret Wars to Two, the incursions of Mephisto, and the machinations of the cosmic beings, Doom's presence was constant. He was the mortal who dared to speak as an equal to gods, who sought not destruction but correction. When Galactus walked the earth again, Doom did not flee. He sought to claim the Devourer's power as his own. When time unraveled, Doom used his time platform not to escape but to rewrite. Yet behind every cosmic act, the man remained painfully human. Doom's love for his mother haunted him still. His pride in his people drove him relentlessly. He demanded perfection of himself because he demanded security for them. In Latveria, no child starved. In Latveria, the streets gleamed with order. Foreign spies called it dystopia. Doom called it civilization. He told his people, you are safe because Doom watches. You are free because Doom rules. And in the silence that followed, no one dared to disagree. Throughout the 1980s, Doom's legend spread across realities. Alternate futures and timelines depicted him conquering the world, ruling the cosmos, or even ascending as Emperor of a united Earth. But in the main continuity, Earth 6616, he remained what he had always been, a paradox in human form. A villain to some, a visionary to others, a reflection of humanity's own hunger for order. Even Reed Richards, who had every reason to hate him, admitted once that the world might be safer under Doom's hand, if only because Doom would never let it fall. By the close of the decade, Doom's battles had become less about conquest and more about legacy. He sought to ensure that when humanity finally realized his truth, they would find him not as tyrant, but as architect. In Fantastic 4 Annual Summer 20, he crossed time to confront his own future, a weary monarch questioning whether perfection was worth the loneliness it required. The encounter ended as all of Doom's stories do, with conviction unbroken but with eyes that had seen too much. The 1980s closed with Doom exactly where destiny had always placed him, alone in the throne room of Castle Doom, surrounded by wonders of his own making. Outside, the Latverian countryside slept under snow. Inside, the monarch stared into the mirrored face of his mask and saw both a man and a monster. He whispered almost tenderly, Doom is the sum of all that is necessary. Mercy is a luxury of gods. Then he extinguished the lights. The world would wake to find him already planning the next century. Chapter 4. God Emperor Doom. By the time the universe began to collapse, Victor von Doom had long ceased to be a mere monarch. He had become something more elusive, a constant, a force of will that outlasted every crisis. He had fought gods, commanded demons, and built nations from ruin. But none of that compared to what was coming, the end of everything. Across the infinite tapestry of the multiverse, worlds were dying. Entire realities collided in events known as incursions, moments when two Earths from parallel dimensions occupied the same space. Only one could survive, the other burned. The Illuminati, a secret council of the most brilliant minds, Reed Richards, Tony Stark, T'Challa, Stephen Strange, Namor, Black Bolt, tried to avert the inevitable, destroying worlds to save their own. Doom watched from afar, disgusted not by their desperation but by their lack of vision. They think in equations, he said, but the problem is faith. When even gods trembled before annihilation, Doom saw an opportunity. In the chaos of collapsing realities, Doom turned to an ancient power, the Beyonders, the same godlike entities whose essence he had once stolen on Battleworld decades before. They were architects of existence itself, beyond morality or purpose, interested only in experiment. It was they who had triggered the incursions, pruning universes like a gardener trims branches. But Doom had studied gods long enough to understand their flaws. He devised a plan that no mortal had ever dared. He would kill them. Using the combined intellect of Owen Reese, the Molecule Man, a being of near limitless energy. Doom constructed a weapon from the dying fragments of the multiverse. It was not technology or sorcery, but a synthesis of both, powered by conviction. With Strange as witness, Doom confronted the Beyonders in their own dimension. The battle was beyond comprehension. Entire timelines flickered out like candles. When it ended, Doom stood triumphant among the ashes of gods. He had stolen their power once more, not through chance, but through will. With that power, he remade existence. When the multiverse finally fell and all of reality collapsed into void, Doom refused to let it end. From the fragments of infinite worlds, he built a new one. Battleworld, a patchwork planet forged from the remains of universes past. Each region was a reflection of what once was, kingdoms ruled by alternate versions of familiar faces. There was a land of Hulks, a domain of Ultrons, a desert ruled by Apocalypse. At the center stood Doomguard, his fortress, where the new god ruled from a throne of white stone and iron. To his people, he was God Emperor Doom. To himself, he was simply Victor, the man who had done what Reed Richards could not. He had saved the world. Doom ruled Battleworld for 8 years. In that time, he reshaped the laws of nature, rewriting memories so that no one remembered the old multiverse. Susan Storm became his queen, her children, Franklin and Valeria, his own. The Fantastic Four never existed. Reed Richards never was. Doom created peace through structure. The Thors became his enforcers, wielding hammers as the police of creation. There was no poverty, no chaos, no rebellion, until there was. Deep in the heart of this world, in a land called Doomstadt, cracks began to form in the illusion. Fragments of the old worlds resurfaced, survivors from the multiverse's death, heroes who remembered what had come before. Among them were T'Challa, Peter Parker, Carol Danvers, and eventually the man Doom had tried to erase from existence, Reed Richards. When Reed returned, the universe itself seemed to pause. The two men had always been opposites, mind and ego, curiosity and control. But now, standing in the throne room of Battleworld, they were the last two architects of reality left. Their confrontation was not just personal, it was cosmic. Reed accused Doom of playing God. Doom countered that someone had to. "You talk of choice," he said, "but choice led to extinction. I built a world where no one dies, no one starves, no one fears. Tell me, Richards, what have you ever built that lasted?" Reed looked at him with something close to pity. "You could have done all this," he said quietly, "without the mask." It was not a blow of fists that decided their battle, but of ideals. As they fought, the molecule man, the living fuse of creation, watched. He had been the key to Doom's power, his energy sustaining Battleworld. And as he listened to both men, he realized that one acted out of fear, the other out of hope. You both could have saved everything, he said, but only one of you wanted to share it. Then, with a thought, he transferred the god, power from Doom, to Reed Richards. The universe broke again, this time not into chaos, but rebirth. Reed and his family used the power to rebuild the multiverse, one world at a time, restoring what Doom had destroyed. Doom fell to earth, his omnipotence stripped away, his mask shattered. Yet when he awoke, his face was whole, unscarred for the first time since his youth. Whether this was Reed's mercy or the universe's irony, none could say. Doom looked into a mirror and saw not a god, not a monster, but a man. In the aftermath, the world expected his vengeance. Instead, Victor von Doom disappeared. He left Latveria, abandoned his throne, and walked the world as a man searching for meaning. For the first time, he had nothing to prove. When Tony Stark fell during the events of Civil War II, Doom reemerged, not as destroyer, but as successor. He took up the mantle of Iron Man, calling himself the infamous Iron Man, seeking to honor the man he once called rival. To many, it was blasphemy. To Doom, it was redemption. I have been emperor, he said. Now I will learn to be a man. But the shadow of Battleworld lingered. In quiet moments, Doom would dream of the world he built, the children he called his own, the peace that existed only under his will. And sometimes, when the stars aligned just so, he could almost hear them again. The god had fallen, yes, but the dream of perfection never truly died. It waited in the heart of the man who had held eternity in his hand and let it go. Victor von Doom's story was never about conquest. It was about the endless struggle between genius and humility, control and chaos, divinity and humanity. He had seen what gods feared most, that even perfection can be lonely. And so he walked the earth, unmasked and unbroken, whispering to no one, Doom remains. Chapter 5. The Iron Redemption. Redemption was never meant for Victor von Doom, or so the world believed. For decades his name had been synonymous with tyranny, arrogance, and brilliance turned inward like a blade. Yet when the dust settled after secret wars and the last echoes of godhood faded, Doom emerged into a quieter world. And for the first time in his life, the mirror did not lie. His face was whole, no scars, no burns, no disfigurement. It was as if the universe itself had granted him one impossible gift, the chance to begin again. He wandered Latveria in silence, unseen by his subjects. His castle stood abandoned, its halls empty, the throne cold. He watched the people rebuild without him, guided by the memory of his efficiency but unshackled from his rule. For years, he had told them they needed Doom to survive. Now he saw that they could live without him. That truth hurt more than any scar. The world, too, had changed. Tony Stark, the man who had been his rival not in hatred but in intellect, was gone. After Civil War II, Stark lay comatose, his consciousness preserved in digital stasis. The world of heroes trembled without its Iron Man. And in that void, Doom found a purpose. It began not with ambition, but with memory. He remembered Battleworld, where he had ruled as God yet failed to save even himself. He remembered Reed Richards' final words, that Doom could build a better world if only he did so with open hands. Perhaps, he thought, the only way to prove Richards wrong was to prove him right. And so the monarch of Latveria set aside his crown and forged a new one of iron. The armor he built was unlike any before it, sleek, silver, and unadorned, without the horns or cape that had defined his rule. It was not the armor of a god or a king, but of a man trying to be more than both. He took up the mantle of Iron Man not as imitation, but as confession. The world needs a man of iron, he said. I will be that man until the true one returns. The Avengers laughed, the villains sneered, and SHIELD issued warrants before they even understood what he intended. But Doom did not ask for permission. He simply acted. His first acts were small, deliberate. He dismantled rogue Hydra cells, disarmed terrorist networks, and hunted the Magia Syndicate to extinction. Criminals who expected torture instead found mercy. Those who begged for mercy found judgment. He operated in silence, leaving no trace but the ruins of corruption. The world's intelligence agencies whispered in confusion. Dr. Doom was saving people. He rescued Maria Hill from assassination. He saved Sharon Carter's life in Madrid. He even intervened when Ben Grimm, the Thing, faced death on a SHIELD mission gone wrong. Their reunion was brutal, honest, and strangely tender. "You?" Ben growled through blood and dust. "You're the hero now?" Doom's reply was quiet. "Someone has to be." But redemption is never clean. The ghosts of Doom's past did not forgive. The villains he once commanded, Mad Thinker, Diablo, the Hood, rose to challenge him, seeing his newfound heroism as betrayal. Even the heroes he tried to aid doubted his sincerity. "A wolf in armor," Spider-Man called him. No matter how shiny, still a wolf. Yet for every accusation, Doom responded not with words, but with deeds. He saved infants from collapsing hospitals. He prevented nuclear war. He even freed demons from Mephisto's realm in acts of penance. The world began to hesitate before calling him monster. Still, Victor could not escape himself. The armor of Iron Man became both confession and cage. Every time he looked at its reflection, he saw Tony's ghost staring back. To understand heroism, Doom realized, was to understand failure, and failure demanded vulnerability, something he had never allowed. So he turned to those who might remind him what it meant to be human. He visited Amara Pereira, the scientist who had once seen the man beneath the mask. Their bond deepened, not as lovers of passion, but of intellect and trust. For the first time, Doom spoke not of destiny, but of hope. "I once thought perfection was salvation," he told her. "Now I think it's just a prison with mirrors on every wall." The world began to notice. Nick Fury's intelligence networks called it the Doom Anomaly. Supervillain activity plummeted wherever he operated. Nations began to question whether Latveria's exile of its former ruler had been a mistake. But heroes, especially Ben Grimm, remained wary. When Grimm confronted him in a safe house after a mission, Doom did not fight. He removed his mask and said, "If I must atone, then let it begin here." Ben hesitated. In that moment, he saw not a tyrant, but a man who had finally understood consequence. And yet, the universe does not forgive easily. The Hood, a crime lord whose mystical power had once rivaled Mephisto's, saw Doom's repentance as an opportunity. Gathering his armies, he launched a campaign to destroy everything Doom had built. Using ancient demonic artifacts, he resurrected some of Doom's oldest enemies, including those he had killed himself. They attacked not to conquer, but to humiliate. "You cannot be redeemed," the Hood sneered. "You can only pretend." But Doom had learned something the world did not yet believe. Humility was not weakness, it was control. When the Hood's demonic army engulfed New York, Doom called upon the very hell he once sought to dominate. He faced Mephisto himself again, not as supplicant, but as equal. "You have no soul left to sell," the demon hissed. Doom smiled. "Then I have nothing to lose." The battle ripped through dimensions. When it was over, the Hood lay defeated, Mephisto banished, and Doom stood bloodied but unbroken. For the first time in his life, the people cheered him. But their cheers felt hollow. He had saved the world, yes, but it was not his world. Tony Stark's legacy still hung over him. The Avengers tolerated him, not embraced him. He was a guest in a house that would never be his. When Tony's digital consciousness finally reawakened, Doom knew his time was over. "The armor suits you," Tony told him, "but it's never really been about the armor, has it?" Doom nodded. "No, it's about what a man does when the mask comes off." He removed the armor and walked away. The infamous Iron Man vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. Some say he returned to Latveria, others that he wandered the world in search of penance. In truth, he went nowhere and everywhere, rebuilding quietly what war and ego had destroyed. He no longer sought thrones nor absolution, only understanding, When asked once whether he still considered himself Dr. Doom, he replied, "Always. Doom is not a title. It is a reminder of what happens when a man believes himself above others." Victor Von Doom's redemption was imperfect, incomplete, and therefore real. He could never undo his crimes, but he could choose every day to be something else. And in that choice, painful, uncertain, unending, lay the only kind of power he had never truly mastered: grace. Chapter 6: The Return of the Monarch. The road to redemption is never a straight line. For Victor Von Doom, it was a circle, a path that led him back to where it had begun, to the cold mountains of Latveria and the castle that still bore his name. Years had passed since he shed the mask of Iron Man and walked the world as a man reborn, and yet the world refused to let him forget what he was. Some called him hero, others monster, but to the people of Latveria he was still their sovereign. When he returned, he did not come as conqueror. He came quietly, his armor muted, his steps unannounced. The gates of Castle Doom opened without command, as if the very stones recognized their master. In the great hall, the banners of his regime still hung, untouched by time. The throne was empty. Doom sat upon it and whispered, "The kingdom endures, even when the king does not." The world had changed while he was gone. The heroes he once knew had died, returned, and evolved. The multiverse itself had been rewritten more than once. Latveria, though prosperous, had drifted into corruption under interim rulers who claimed to serve the people, but serve themselves. Doom found his nation fractured, its borders weak, its people nostalgic for tyranny because tyranny had kept them safe. When he stood before the public balcony of Castle Doom, tens of thousands gathered below, not in protest, but in silence. He removed his cloak and said only, "I am home." The crowd knelt, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Doom's reign began again, but this time he did not call it rule. He called it stewardship. From his throne, Victor looked outward once more. He had seen godhood and discarded it. He had worn Iron Man's armor and learned humility. Now he sought something greater than power, understanding. Latveria became his laboratory, not of science, but of philosophy. He restructured his government, dissolving the secret police, granting limited autonomy to local councils. He called it enlightened order. To outsiders, it was dictatorship with better branding. To his people, it was peace. Yet Doom knew that peace without challenge was stagnation, and stagnation was death. The universe soon obliged him with conflict. A mysterious explosion in the outer solar system destroyed an international energy station designed to harness black hole radiation, an invention Doom himself had endorsed but not built. The disaster killed thousands and left Earth accused by the galactic community of reckless arrogance. Doom, as both scientist and head of state, was implicated. His enemies in the United Nations moved to sanction him. The heroes of Earth prepared for confrontation. But Doom had already begun his own investigation, tracing the sabotage to a conspiracy that stretched across dimensions. The culprit, he discovered, was not a government nor a rival, but himself from another timeline. The alternate Victor Von Doom, known only as Kang the Conqueror, was a future version of Nathaniel Richards, Reed's distant descendant, but one whose lineage intersected Doom's legacy. In the great tapestry of Marvel's multiverse, their fates were entangled. Kang saw Doom's attempts at redemption as weakness and sought to correct the error by erasing his timeline. What followed was not a war of armies but of minds. Doom confronted Kang across the corridors of time, their battle spanning centuries, each encounter rewriting fragments of history. In one timeline, Doom killed Kang. In another, Kang killed Doom. But inevitability favors persistence, and Doom's will was eternal. When the two finally met, face to face in the ruins of Chronopolis, Kang mocked him. "You can never escape me, Victor. I am your future." Doom's reply was cold, certain. Then the future must kneel. Through sheer intellect and sorcery, Doom trapped Kang in a temporal paradox, sealing him in a loop that would repeat endlessly, a fitting punishment for one who lived by manipulating eternity. When Doom returned to his own time, he found the world unchanged and yet subtly different. The explosion that had destroyed the space station was undone. Lives once lost were restored. Reality itself had corrected its error. Doom stood beneath the stars and said quietly, "Perhaps the universe has learned from me." But victory never came without consequence. Doom's manipulation of time attracted the attention of cosmic forces, the likes of Galactus, the Black Winter, and the Reckoning War that would soon engulf the multiverse. When the Fantastic Four confronted him, Reed Richards demanded answers. "How many times must you break the universe before you learn to live in it?" Reed asked. Doom, for once, did not answer in anger. "I have learned to live in it," he said. "Now I'm trying to understand it." Despite their history, there was a strange détente between them. Reed saw a man who had finally begun to grasp the cost of his intellect. Doom saw in Reed a reflection of the path he could never fully walk, a man who led without ruling. During the events of Fantastic Four Vol. No. 6, Doom even allied with the heroes to face threats greater than his pride. When the Reckoning threatened to unravel the cosmos, Doom offered his aid not out of pity or politics, but out of reason. "If the universe falls," he said, "there will be nothing left to prove." Still, redemption is never absolute. The same pride that had driven him to rebuild the multiverse stirred within him once more. He saw how the world looked to others for leadership, to the Avengers, to the Fantastic Four, to Wakanda, and he knew they would never trust him completely. So he made peace with that truth. He did not seek approval anymore, only legacy. He founded the Doom Foundation, a network of scientists, mystics, and thinkers devoted to solving problems beyond the reach of nations. It was not charity, it was preparation. Humanity will destroy itself, he told his advisors. When that day comes, they will need a hand steady enough to rebuild. That hand will be mine. In his private moments, Doom continued his correspondence with Stephen Strange, the only man he considered his equal in spirit. The two debated the balance of power and faith, science and mysticism. Strange once asked him, "Do you ever fear what you will become again?" Doom's answer was simple. "Every day, that is how I know I'm changing." When the world next saw him, Doom stood before the United Nations, not as conqueror, not as defendant, but as witness. He spoke of peace, innovation, and cooperation, his voice calm, his presence magnetic. The cameras captured a man in full command of himself, and yet his eyes betrayed something new, not arrogance, but awareness. He concluded his address with words that would echo across generations. "Power without purpose is chaos. Purpose without humility is doom." The assembly rose in applause, not universal, but genuine. In the twilight of his reign, Victor von Doom became both myth and man. He ruled Latveria once more, but with restraint. He continued to build weapons, but also hospitals. He no longer sought to dominate gods, but to understand them. Some nights he stood at the balcony of Castle Doom, the wind cold against the steel of his armor, and looked out at the stars. He thought of his mother, of Reed, of the boy who once built machines to speak to the dead. "Perhaps," he murmured to the night, "Doom has finally learned to listen." And somewhere in the darkness, between the hum of circuits and the whisper of the wind, the universe seemed to listen back. Chapter 7, The Eternal Rival. There are rivalries that burn for a lifetime. And then there is the one between Victor von Doom and Reed Richards, a rivalry that transcended time, death, and even godhood. By the era following the Reckoning War, the universe had seen both men at their most powerful and their most broken. They had saved reality, destroyed it, and rebuilt it again, each in their own way. But neither could ever truly escape the other. To understand Doom, one had to understand Richards, and to understand Richards, one had to understand Doom. They were the twin pillars of human potential, one driven by humility, the other by pride, one by curiosity, the other by control. After the cosmic chaos of the Reckoning War subsided, Doom returned to Latveria to rule with a strange, quiet dignity. His people lived well, his technology advanced civilization itself. But every triumph, every invention, seemed to echo with an unspoken question. What would Reed think? Even in absence, Richards haunted him. The Fantastic Four, now older and tempered by loss, had reassembled their family and their purpose. Reed, as ever, was looking outward, to new galaxies, new questions, new wonders. Doom, for his part, looked inward, to the flaws within creation, the weaknesses of men, and the cost of their choices. Their next meeting was not on a battlefield, but in the ruins of the blue area of the moon, a neutral ground for men who had once fought for the soul of Earth. The Fantastic Four had uncovered remnants of the Reckoning's technology, machines capable of rewriting probability. Doom, naturally, was already there. When Reed arrived, Doom did not reach for his gauntlets. He stood quietly, his cloak moving in the lunar wind, and said, "I knew you would come." Reed nodded. "I knew you'd never leave it alone." The two men spent hours walking through the ruins, not as enemies, but as philosophers. Reed spoke of rebuilding, of responsibility. Doom spoke of inevitability. "You think the universe can be fixed," Doom said. "It cannot. It can only be ruled wisely." Reed replied, "That's the difference between us, Victor. You think wisdom is control. I think it's acceptance." Doom smiled beneath his mask. "And acceptance is surrender." Despite their familiar barbs, something had shifted between them. They no longer fought out of hatred, but out of recognition. They had both worn godhood and survived it. They had both lost and regained everything that mattered. There was nothing left to prove, only something left to understand. Reed admitted, reluctantly, that Doom's nation had become a model of order. Doom admitted, even more reluctantly, that Reed's compassion had changed lives far beyond the reach of science or sorcery. "Perhaps," Doom said one night, as they gazed upon the Earth from the moon, "we are not opposites, but constants, variables that define each other." Reed replied softly, "Or maybe we're both, trying to be what we'll never be, whole." Yet fate, as always, demanded conflict. When the Baxter Building's latest portal array destabilized, opening a rift into a dimension of living entropy, it was Doom who answered the distress call, not because he cared for the Fantastic Four, but because the collapse threatened the entire world. Standing beside Reed once again, Doom manipulated cosmic energy with ruthless precision, sealing rifts, recalibrating fields, saving lives. When the crisis ended, the crowd saw two men, one in blue, one in green, standing together. For a moment, they looked like brothers, but as soon as the danger passed, their nature reasserted itself. "You're welcome," Doom said dryly. Reed's reply was as calm as ever. "You didn't do it for them." Doom turned to leave. "I did it because I could." Their rivalry, paradoxically, became the foundation for much of Earth's safety in the modern age. When cosmic threats arose, it was often Reed who found the theory, and Doom who found the means. They worked in parallel, not as partners but as mirrors, each innovation by one inspiring an equal or opposite response from the other. The world began to realize that its greatest genius and its greatest tyrant were, in truth, two sides of the same miracle. There could be no Richards without Doom, and no Doom without Richards. As the years passed, the competition between them evolved into correspondence. They exchanged encrypted messages, formulas, proofs, questions. Their letters, found later in the archives of the Future Foundation, read more like philosophical debates than scientific arguments. "Is creation an act of defiance or faith?" Reed once wrote. Doom's reply, "Both. Faith in oneself, defiance against entropy." Another note from Doom read, "You mistake mercy for strength. Mercy is a tool of kings, not of equals." Reed responded simply, "Then perhaps that's why kings fall." Their final great encounter came during the Fantastic Four Volume 7 arc, when a temporal rift threatened to consume the Earth's timeline itself, rewriting centuries of human history. To repair it required two minds operating as one, two men who had once destroyed universes now called to save them. Reed proposed collaboration. Doom accepted without hesitation. For days they worked side by side, their intellects harmonizing like twin stars. For once there was no argument, no pride, only focus. When the rift finally stabilized, Reed turned to thank him. Doom was gone. He had returned to Latveria, leaving only a single note on the console. It read, "The future is yours, Richards, but it will always bear my mark." In the years that followed, Reed and Sue visited Latveria under diplomatic pretense. They found Doom older, quieter, but still commanding. He welcomed them with formality, not warmth. Yet his children, adopted orphans he raised as heirs, called Sue Lady Storm and Reed Teacher. They dined together discussing science, art, and memory. When Reed complimented the peace of Latveria, Doom said simply, "It is the peace of discipline, nothing more, nothing less." Sue smiled sadly. "You still don't understand peace, Victor. It isn't control." Doom's eyes softened behind his mask. And yet, it endures. When Reed finally died, an event that echoed across the multiverse, Doom attended the memorial, uninvited but unopposed. He stood apart from the heroes, his cape trailing in the wind, and said nothing. When asked why he had come, he answered, "To ensure the record is complete. History must know that he was the only man I ever envied." Then he turned away, vanishing into the mist. In the centuries that followed, stories of Doom and Richards became legend, tales of two minds that built the impossible and fought to define what humanity could be. Some said Doom continued to watch from the shadows, ensuring the survival of Reed's descendants. Others claimed he became a myth, a ghost guarding Latveria until the end of time. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between arrogance and faith. In the quiet eternity of his final days, Victor von Doom sat once more upon his throne, older, heavier, yet still unyielding. He looked to the stars, the same stars he and Reed had once studied side by side, and whispered, "The dream endures, even when the dreamers do not." And in that moment, the man who had once been God, tyrant, hero, and rival became something greater, the eternal constant of a universe forever shaped by his will and his wonder. Chapter 8. Doom Beyond Time. Time has never been a prison for Victor von Doom. It is a tool, a laboratory, a mirror in which he sees not possibilities but inevitabilities. Across centuries and across universes, his name has persisted like a law of physics, unchanging, unyielding, eternal. Where other men fade into myth, Doom becomes it. From the dawn of the 21st century to the far reaches of the 2099 era and the strange aeons beyond, there has always been a Doom. In every world where humanity endures, his shadow stretches long across the ages, a testament not to evil, but to endurance. The first echoes of his timeless legacy came through his experiments with temporal engineering. In his prime, Doom's time platform, his most dangerous invention, allowed him to navigate eras as easily as corridors. He once walked among pharaohs, dined with Da Vinci, and debated Newton about the nature of gravity. But every journey taught him the same truth. Time was not a path, but a loop, and Doom was both cause and consequence of his own legend. This understanding crystallized in one of his most haunting encounters, Doom 2099. In the year 2099, the world had changed beyond recognition. Megacorporations ruled nations, and the ideals of the Age of Heroes had dissolved into digital dust. Out of nowhere, a man appeared in Nueva York, clad in ancient armor, claiming to be Victor von Doom. No one believed him, not at first, but his intellect was unmistakable. His eyes burned with the same purpose, his tone carried the same unbreakable rhythm. Whether he was the Doom of the past displaced through time or a descendant born of his ideology, no one could ever say with certainty. He seized control of Latveria once again, now a nation of machines and slaves, and restored order to a world that had forgotten the word. He challenged the corrupt corporations, dismantled the tyranny of Alchemax, and gave power back to the people, though in his way through fear and design. Humanity must always be ruled, he told them, if not by Doom, then by chaos. Doom 2099 reigned not as tyrant, but as philosopher-king. He reintroduced education, rebuilt the environment, and created a technological utopia. The people adored him and feared him in equal measure, as they always had. Yet his rule was challenged by the same force that had always haunted him, humanity's refusal to accept perfection. He fell in battle against the forces of corruption, betrayed not by gods or heroes, but by men too weak to believe. In his final moments, as he lay dying among the ruins of his empire, he whispered, "Doom is not a man. Doom is an idea." His body perished, but his words lived on. Centuries later, the Church of Doom emerged, a sect of scholars and scientists who worshipped intellect and will as divine virtues, claiming that through reason and strength of purpose, any man could ascend as Doom once had. Their creed was simple: perfection through mastery, mastery through will. Yet Doom's presence was not limited to a single future. Across the multiverse, in infinite timelines where history twisted into new shapes, variations of Victor Von Doom appeared, each one a reflection of the same truth viewed through different mirrors. Some, like Infinitus Doom, fused technology with cosmic energy, becoming machines of pure consciousness. Others, like Doom Supreme, mastered the mystic arts beyond even the sorcerer supreme. Doom Supreme was the most terrifying of all, a victor who had conquered not one world but countless. In his universe, he slew his Reed Richards, enslaved his Galactus, and imprisoned his gods. His will was absolute, his compassion non-existent. He joined the multiversal masters of evil, seeking to bring his philosophy to every universe, a reign of order, pure and merciless. To him, chaos was a disease, and only Doom was the cure. When Doom Supreme crossed into the main Earth 616 reality, he faced his prime self, the victor who had walked through redemption, humility, and pain. Their confrontation was silent at first, a clash of gazes that mirrored eternity. "You are weak," Doom Supreme said. "You have forgotten what it means to rule." Victor replied calmly, "And you have forgotten what it means to live." The battle that followed was not merely of power, but of ideology. Magic and science intertwined, universes bent, and the air itself screamed under the weight of paradox. In the end, Doom Supreme was defeated, not because Victor was stronger, but because he was wiser. "You fight to control the multiverse," he said to his dying counterpart. "I fight to understand it. That is why I will always win." With those words, he sealed the Supreme within a timeless void, a mirror of his own creation, a reminder of what he once was and what he could always become again. After that confrontation, Doom's legend evolved into something transcendental. Across dimensions, he appeared as mentor, savior, or cautionary tale. To the mystics, he was proof that science and sorcery were but two faces of the same truth. To the futurists, he was the god who refused worship. Even the Watchers, those silent cosmic observers, debated whether Doom was anomaly or inevitability. One Watcher, Uatu, once recorded in his archives, "In every universe, there is a Victor Von Doom. His existence is the universe's test of balance, the line between arrogance and enlightenment." In the final centuries of recorded history, long after the last Avengers had faded into memory, humanity colonized the stars. They brought with them relics of the past, names, myths, echoes. On a distant colony, carved into the stone of a temple under a twin sun, an inscription was found in an ancient dialect: "Only through will may man transcend." Beneath it, a mask of iron, polished smooth by centuries of reverence. The archaeologists who found it didn't know who he was. Some called it a god, others a warning. But somewhere, in a place beyond time, Victor Von Doom smiled. He had long since surpassed mortality, ascending not through divinity or power, but through idea. His consciousness lingered across dimensions, observing, intervening, ensuring that the dream of order, purpose, and intellect endured. Not as domination, but as preservation. The universe, once chaotic and cruel, now moved to the rhythm of his philosophy. In some far corner of existence, a world thrived under invisible guidance. Its rulers spoke of honor, logic, and compassion enforced through structure. They did not know his name, but they lived by his creed. Doom had become what he always sought to be: eternal, not a man, not a god, but a principle, a reflection of humanity's endless struggle to rise above itself. In every age, on every world, where there is chaos, there will always be someone who looks into the storm and whispers, "There must be order." And in that whisper, his name will live again. Victor von Doom, the first, the last, the inevitable. Chapter 9. The Science of the Soul. For all his brilliance, Victor von Doom had always believed that the soul was an equation waiting to be solved. It was, in his view, not divine mystery, but an undiscovered principle, a hidden symmetry binding the material and the metaphysical. He had spent his youth mastering machinery, his prime mastering magic, and his middle years mastering the self. What remained was the question that haunted him even in triumph. What is the essence of will? For Doom, will was not desire. It was the purest energy in existence, the force that separated men from gods and order from chaos. And so, in the quiet years after the wars, after his fall and redemption, he began the last great experiment of his life, the unification of science and soul. He began not in a laboratory, but in memory. The echoes of his mother's screams in Mephisto's realm had never left him. They were the first data points of his spiritual hypothesis. When he had rescued her spirit decades earlier with the aid of Doctor Strange, he had felt a truth that equations could not express, connection, not control. He had dismissed it then as weakness. Now, older and tempered, he understood it as the foundation of all existence. If magic is will made manifest, he wrote in his journals, then science is faith disciplined by method. To separate them is to blind oneself to the universe's full design. From his throne in Latveria, Doom built the Sanctum Latverium, a structure equal parts observatory, temple, and quantum research facility. Its walls were inscribed with both formulas and incantations, Maxwell's equations carved beside the runes of Watum. He gathered no students, no assistants. The work of the soul, he said, is a solitary pursuit. For months, he meditated at the nexus between technology and transcendence, fasting not from food but from ambition. His mind traveled through memories like corridors, Reed's mocking smile, Tony's skepticism, his mother's sorrow, his own arrogance. Each vision was a variable in the equation he sought to balance. In those long nights, Doom achieved what even the Sorcerer Supreme had only glimpsed. He found a way to measure consciousness, not as energy, but as pattern. Using quantum interference fields, he mapped the resonance of thought itself, proving that intention could shape probability. His discovery, recorded in secret under the code name Project Elysium, stated, "The soul is the universe observing itself through the lens of will." It was not revelation but confirmation. What mystics had whispered for millennia, Doom had quantified. And with that proof came temptation. If will could shape reality, then could Doom, who had always possessed the strongest will of all, reshape the universe simply by thought? It was the question he had asked as God Emperor, now rephrased in humbler form. He constructed the Soul Engine, a device capable of amplifying psychic intention through harmonic resonance. Unlike his weapons of the past, this machine was designed not to dominate, but to align. Its purpose was elegant, to tune the consciousness of Latveria and perhaps the world toward harmony. But harmony, Doom knew, was a dangerous word. Even benevolence, he wrote, must be measured lest it become tyranny again. When the Soul Engine activated, the world held its breath. For one fleeting moment, minds across the globe felt a stillness, a synchrony, a quiet hum, as if reality itself had exhaled. Crime dropped to nothing. Conflicts ceased. Doom felt connected to every living being, not as ruler, but as participant. He saw through the eyes of a farmer in Wakanda, the thoughts of a child in Tokyo, the prayers of a monk in Kathmandu. It was overwhelming, humbling, divine. And then, like all things too perfect, it began to collapse. The harmony fractured under the weight of individual thought. Every human will, every doubt, every pain reverberated back into the core, feeding upon itself. Doom, at the center of the storm, bore the full burden of humanity's chaos. He felt their fear, their hatred, their smallness, and their hope. The pain drove him to his knees, the armor crackling under psychic overload. For a moment, he thought he would die, but instead, he laughed. "So this is what it means to rule," he said through the static, "to carry the weight of every soul." With one final command, he shut the engine down, dispersing the energy harmlessly into the atmosphere. When he awoke days later, Doctor Strange was at his side. The Sorcerer Supreme had sensed the disturbance from realms away and arrived expecting catastrophe. What he found instead was enlightenment. "You tried to unite the world," Strange said, "and it nearly destroyed you." Doom smiled faintly. "Nearly," he replied, "but I learned something Reed never could." Strange raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Doom's gaze turned to the stars. "The universe does not need to be saved. It needs to be understood." The incident became legend among the mystic community. Some claimed Doom had touched the divine, others that he had glimpsed the architecture of consciousness itself. He published none of his findings. Instead, he sealed the Sanctum Latverium, leaving it as monument and warning both. "Knowledge is sacred," he inscribed above the doors, "because it can damn as easily as it can save." In the years that followed, Doom's behavior changed subtly. He still ruled, still invented, still spoke with the voice of destiny. But his edge had softened. He listened more. He spared more. He no longer sought to correct the world, only to guide it when it faltered. His advisors noted that he began to meditate each dawn facing east, as if awaiting the sun rather than commanding it. And though none dared ask, they all sensed that their monarch had finally made peace. Not with his enemies, not with his past, but with himself. It was said that on the last night of the Sanctum's operation, before sealing its gates, Doom stood before the Soul Engine one final time. He placed his hand upon its polished frame and whispered, "Once I wanted to command the universe. Now I only wish to hear its music." Then he turned away, leaving the machine dormant, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. Victor Von Doom had mastered science. He had mastered sorcery. But in the end, it was the soul, the unquantifiable essence of being, that humbled him. He had sought to prove that will alone could shape existence, only to learn that understanding it required surrender. The man who had defied gods and rebuilt creation had finally found something greater than conquest: connection. And in that silence, in that fragile balance between intellect and empathy, the line between man and myth finally disappeared. There was only the hum of the universe, and somewhere within it, the quiet whisper of a name that had outlived everything else: Doom. Chapter 10. The Latverian Renaissance. There have been many ages of Victor Von Doom, eras of conquest, eras of silence, and eras of reflection, but none as strange and paradoxical as the one historians of Earth 616 would later call the Latverian Renaissance. It began not with a declaration or a war, but with a whisper that spread quietly across the borders of Eastern Europe. Doom has changed. For decades, the name had been synonymous with tyranny, intellect, and invincibility. Yet after the Reckoning War, after his last great debate with Reed Richards, and after his final experiments with the soul itself, Doom returned home not to reclaim a throne, but to rebuild a civilization. Latveria had endured in his absence, but it was fractured, corrupted by the mediocrity of leaders who mimicked his order without his vision. When Doom crossed the Iron Valley and entered his capital again, the people did not flee. They stood still, uncertain, as their monarch walked among them without armor, his cloak plain, his stride human. "I come not as ruler," he said, his voice echoing through the cobblestone square, "but as steward. Doom will build, and you will build with him." In the months that followed, Latveria transformed from fortress state to beacon of knowledge. The castle that had once housed weapons and doombots became the Institute for the Advancement of Humanity, a university that blended the disciplines of physics, engineering, metaphysics, and philosophy. Doom personally drafted its first curriculum, declaring that ignorance is the only true enemy of freedom. Scientists from Wakanda, Asgardian scholars, even students from the Baxter Foundation arrived under his protection. Every visitor signed the same oath: to use knowledge for creation, not destruction. Many questioned whether Doom could ever abide by his own decree, but in those first years he did. He developed new forms of clean energy derived from cosmic residue left after the multiversal collapse, particles invisible to all but his instruments. These Doom cells, as the world would come to call them, provided limitless power without pollution or instability. Within a decade, the global economy began to shift around Latverian technology. Nations once skeptical of Doom now sought his aid, sending envoys and engineers to study his designs. Even Reed Richards, ever the skeptic, could not ignore the data. He wrote to Doom in one of their rare moments of civility, "If this is what you have become, then perhaps there is hope for all of us." Doom's reply was short and uncharacteristically humble. Hope is merely order unrecognized. But peace is never static, and even utopia casts a long shadow. As Latveria's influence grew, so too did unease among the world's powers. The United Nations, long wary of Doom's reach, convened to discuss the implications of his global network of reactors. Doom did not wait to be summoned. He appeared before them, uninvited. His presence silenced the assembly. "You call me tyrant," he said, "because I have done what your committees could not. You call me threat because I do not seek permission to advance civilization. Yet I have given the world warmth, stability, and light. Tell me, who among you can claim the same?" No one answered. By the time he left the chamber, half the nations present had signed agreements to adopt his technology. The others soon followed. Doom never called it empire. He called it stewardship. But even as he spoke of peace, he monitored the world through systems so advanced they bordered on omniscience. His satellites could read neuronal patterns from orbit, mapping human emotion as easily as temperature. When questioned about this surveillance, he answered simply, "Freedom without stability is chaos. Doom offers you structure. What you do within it is your choice." To the common citizen, it sounded like wisdom. To his old allies, it sounded like warning. Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four watched from afar, torn between admiration and fear. Sue Storm once told her husband, "Maybe he's finally doing it right." Reed shook his head. "He's doing it perfectly. That's what makes it dangerous." When reports surfaced that the Doom reactors could adapt themselves to local populations, adjusting not only power output but social data, Richards grew convinced that Doom's utopia was built upon invisible strings. He wrote another letter, longer this time, more personal. "Victor, I know you believe in the order of things, but when order becomes absolute, freedom dies quietly, smiling, believing itself safe." Doom's response came 3 weeks later. "You mistake comfort for submission, Reed. I have given the world peace. If it chooses to call that prison, then so be it. Doom has no interest in their semantics." Still, there was truth in Reed's suspicion. Beneath the shining streets of Doomstadt, hidden deep within the mountain archives, lay the Codex Humanitas, a living algorithm that studied every global event, predicting outcomes with terrifying accuracy. It was, in essence, the collective consciousness of Earth rendered into mathematics. Doom never used it to enslave, only to guide, correcting small errors before they became catastrophes. Yet even he could not deny the seduction of control. He found himself intervening in foreign economies, neutralizing conflicts before they began, toppling governments that endangered stability. Each action justified itself with logic. Each decision felt righteous. And yet, late at night, as he walked the silent halls of Castle Doom, he would pause before the old mirror in his chamber, the one that had once reflected the scars he no longer bore, and ask himself, is this peace or merely silence? It was during this era that Doom began his dialogues with Stephen Strange once more. The Sorcerer Supreme, having seen the consequences of absolute harmony through mystical lenses, warned him that balance could not be sustained by intellect alone. Even paradise requires chaos, Strange told him over a cup of tea in the Sanctum Sanctorum. Doom replied, "Then the universe was poorly designed." Strange smiled sadly. "It wasn't designed, Victor. That's what makes it beautiful." Their conversation lasted through the night. When Doom departed, he left behind a single silver coin engraved with the Latverian crest. On the other side, he had inscribed 3 words: "Order requires faith." Despite skepticism from the superhuman community, the Latverian Renaissance spread. The world began to change in subtle, measurable ways. Wars dwindled, poverty plummeted, disease all but vanished under Doom's medical nanites. Humanity entered what journalists called the Age of Enlightened Order. Even former enemies such as T'Challa and Magneto acknowledged the transformation. The King of Wakanda wrote, "In Doom's world, no one starves. In ours, we debate over the price of food." Perhaps the villain was never doom, but complacency. But peace built on one man's mind is always fragile. Doom's system required constant calibration, and as his health waned with age, he sought to preserve it beyond himself. He created the Doom Continuum, a distributed intelligence designed to emulate his logic without his flaws. It was, effectively, the digitization of his consciousness, a council of synthetic minds modeled on his thought patterns, each programmed to question the others. Even perfection, he wrote, must contain dissent to remain pure. For the first time in history, Doom trusted machines more than men. The Fantastic Four attempted intervention, fearing another collapse like the Ultron events decades earlier. They arrived in Doomstadt uninvited, expecting confrontation. Instead, Doom greeted them at the gates, unarmored, unarmed. "You think I have built another god," he said. "I have built accountability." He led them through the continuum chambers, where holographic avatars of himself debated ethics, probability, and philosophy in an endless cycle. Reed observed them in awe. "You've created a machine that questions you." Doom nodded. "Of course, only fools worship their own reflection." The moment passed in rare peace. When the four left, Sue whispered to Reed, "Maybe this time he means it." And perhaps for a while he did. The Renaissance flourished for decades. Latvian art and literature entered a golden age. Architecture and music fused with mathematics. Children studied quantum theory before arithmetic. Even the Asgardians, once disdainful of mortal hubris, acknowledged the achievement. Yet for all the brilliance, Doom remained unsatisfied. He saw stagnation creeping in, innovation slowing because perfection left nothing to improve. Even paradise, he mused, echoing Strange's warning, requires the storm. The storm came not from without, but within. A generation raised under peace began to question the foundations of their world. The Latvian youth movement demanded decentralization of the Doom reactors, arguing that free will had been reduced to mere function. Their protests were small at first, then massive. For the first time in decades, the streets of Doomstadt filled with dissent. Soldiers refused to fire. And Doom, standing upon his balcony, looked down at the crowd and saw something unexpected. Life, raw and chaotic, unshaped by his will. He raised his hand, not to silence them, but to listen. "If my order has killed your spirit," he said through the loudspeakers, "then Doom has failed." That night, he deactivated half of the surveillance grid. He dismantled the Codex Humanitas and scattered its data into the public domain. "Let them learn," he told his advisors. "Let them err. Let them build something Doom cannot predict." The world held its breath as the first true democracy in Latvian history formed under his watch. And yet, even as he loosened his grip, the people continued to call him "Our Father Doom." In the years that followed, the Latvian Renaissance became humanity's guiding light. The technologies born from Doom's intellect, self-sustaining cities, universal translation fields, planetary weather harmonics, spread beyond Earth, colonizing Mars and Europa. Latvian banners flew not as emblems of empire, but as symbols of stability. The once feared monarch had become humanity's philosopher king, the reluctant architect of its destiny. And yet, in the solitude of his laboratory, Doom still wondered if he had truly escaped himself. Late in the final years of the Renaissance, he wrote one last entry in his journal. "Peace has a rhythm. It is beautiful, but it's not mine." Perhaps in the end, Doom was never meant to rule men, but to remind them that they could rule themselves. On the 100th anniversary of his return, the bells of Doomstadt rang not in fear, but in gratitude. Children studied his equations as art. His portrait hung beside those of Newton, Turing, and Richards. And for the first time in history, Victor von Doom's name was spoken not as curse or prophecy, but as legacy. The Latvian Renaissance had fulfilled its promise. Doom had built a world that no longer needed him, and in doing so, he achieved the one victory that had eluded him for a lifetime: irrelevance. Chapter 11. Emperor of a New World. There are moments in history when the universe itself seems to pause, as if holding its breath before deciding whether to continue or begin again. For Victor von Doom, that moment came during the height of what scholars would call the Second Age of Enlightened Order, when Earth prospered under Latverian technology and every human life, by his own calculation, had improved by measurable degrees. Poverty had vanished, war had become illogical, and the planet itself pulsed with clean energy drawn from Doom cells humming deep beneath the crust. The stars above Earth shone brighter than they had in centuries, refracted by the clear atmosphere of a world that had learned, at last, how to coexist. Humanity celebrated the peace, the progress, the order. Yet far beyond the reach of satellites and science, higher eyes watched and judged. For in the great cosmic scales of existence, such harmony rarely goes unnoticed, and the balance between free will and imposed perfection had tilted once more toward a single mind, Doom's. It began not with thunder or war, but with silence. One night over Latveria, the stars blinked out, not as if extinguished, but as if hidden behind vast, shimmering forms that defied comprehension. They descended without sound or warning, giants of thought and light, faces like shifting galaxies, the celestials. They spoke in harmonics that bent the air, each word resonating through matter and spirit alike. Earth has been altered, they declared. Its will is no longer its own. Panic spread, but Doom stood calm upon the balcony of Castle Doom, his cloak unmoving in the wind. He had predicted their arrival years before. So, he said, gazing upward, even gods come to audit Doom. The Celestials demanded explanation. Their records, etched into the cosmic registry of creation, showed that humanity's probability wave had stabilized beyond natural variance. To beings who measured reality as symphony, this was dissonance. To them, a world without chaos was a world without growth. The melody must change, intoned Arishem the judge, his voice shaking the mountains. You have stilled it. Doom did not kneel. I have tuned it, he answered. There is a difference. The Celestials prepared to wipe Earth clean, to restore what they deemed necessary entropy. But before they could act, the air tore open again, and another presence manifested, the living tribunal, the tri-faced arbiter of universal balance. Even the Celestials bowed their heads in recognition. Doom alone did not. The tribunal's three faces, equity, necessity, and vengeance, regarded him with the stillness of eternity. Victor von Doom of Earth, 116, it spoke, each word echoing through the collective consciousness of humankind. You have shifted the balance of creation. The will of an entire species now orbits your mind. This cannot stand. Doom clasped his hands behind his back. I have freed them from ignorance, he said. If they follow my path, it is because I have shown them reason. The tribunal's central face glowed. Reason without freedom is tyranny, even when it brings peace. Doom's gaze did not waver. Then perhaps tyranny is the natural state of perfection. Thus began the trial of Doom, an event witnessed not in court or cosmos, but in the collective dream of existence itself. The tribunal created a realm outside time, a lattice of thought and memory, where all of Doom's actions, motives, and consequences could be weighed. His accusers were the Celestials, his witnesses, the very souls of Earth. From every corner of the universe came observers, the Watchers, the Vishanti, Eternity, and even Mephisto smiling in the shadows. Doctor Strange appeared as counsel, though Doom neither asked nor acknowledged his help. You cannot argue logic with eternity, Strange whispered. Doom replied, I can remind it that it once had purpose. The tribunal presented the evidence, a world without war, but also without unpredictability. A people free from hunger, yet guided unconsciously by Doom's codex algorithms. Societies whose art and innovation subtly mirrored his ideals. You have made Earth a reflection of yourself, the tribunal declared. Doom considered this, then nodded. If humanity must have a mirror, he said, let it at least reflect its best possibilities. The tribunal turned to the Celestials. What is your judgment? Arishem's voice was final. Correction is required. Energy gathered within their palms, enough to unmake the planet. But before they could act, something extraordinary happened. Across Earth, billions of minds felt the presence of their would-be judges. For the first time in history, humanity looked not to its heroes or gods, but inward. And in that collective awareness, the world spoke as one. We choose to live. The words echoed through the tribunal's realm, not as defiance, but as affirmation. The tribunal hesitated. Doom smiled slightly. You see, he said, they speak with their own voice. I merely gave them the tools to find it. The tribunal withdrew its hand. Your intentions cannot absolve the imbalance you have caused, it said, but perhaps the universe has found equilibrium in spite of you. Doom bowed slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Then let the scales remain uncertain. That is where progress lies. Yet even as the tribunal departed, its final words lingered. Beware, Victor von Doom. The higher the order, the deeper the fall. Should you seek to harmonize the will of creation again, your consciousness will be judged as part of it. Doom understood this for what it was. Not a warning, but a promise. When the sky cleared, the world awoke as if from a shared dream. The celestials were gone, the stars restored. In their place, a faint golden scar stretched across the heavens. Reminder of the trial. The people called it Doom's Ring, a celestial band visible only at dawn, said to represent humanity's first conversation with the cosmos. Scientists tried to explain it as atmospheric refraction. Mystics called it divine. Doom called it proof that he had been heard. In the days that followed, Earth's leaders convened. For the first time in history, they voted unanimously to recognize Latveria as the capital of the New World Assembly of Nations. They did not elect Doom as emperor, they asked him. And for the first time in his life, Victor von Doom hesitated. He walked the halls of his castle for 3 nights without sleep, consulting no one. On the 4th day, he stood before his people and said, "If the world must have a crown, then let it be one that bears no gems, no gold, and no blood. I will wear it only until I find one wiser." The world cheered. Even the Fantastic Four, watching from New York, could not deny that history had changed. As Emperor of Earth, not by conquest but by consent, Doom instituted reforms that blended science, ethics, and governance into one system. Artificial intelligence became the foundation of diplomacy, ensuring transparency. Magic was integrated into medicine. Even interstellar travel became commonplace under his supervision as humanity reached for the stars once more. Yet Doom knew that his empire existed under scrutiny, not from men but from the universe itself. The tribunal's warning haunted him like an echo. Each time he activated a new reactor or restructured a planetary network, he wondered whether he was guiding evolution or scripting it. Reed Richards visited him during this era, their final meeting as equals. Standing in the gardens of Castle Doom, Reed observed the floating spires and cities powered by starlight. "It's beautiful," he admitted, "but is it free?" Doom looked at him, tired but resolute. "Freedom is a seed," he said. "It must be planted in order. Left untended, it devours itself." Reed sighed. "And who decides when it's time to stop pruning?" Doom smiled faintly. "When the garden can survive without the gardener." Reed left that night, and though they never spoke again, he would later tell Sue that Doom had finally understood the cost of perfection. For years, the world flourished. The arts thrived, poverty was forgotten, and the word war became historical terminology. Latveria was not an empire but an ecosystem, sustained by intellect and faith in structure. Doom had achieved the impossible, peace that endured beyond his direct control. And yet, within him, unease remained. He had defied the gods, outwitted cosmic judges, and guided humanity to heights unseen. But every equation has variables unseen until it fails. He knew that somewhere balance awaited him. That balance came unexpectedly. Reports from beyond the solar system revealed anomalies in the fabric of space, time, fractures that mirrored the same harmonic frequency as his Doom reactors. The energy that powered his utopia was rewriting quantum laws on a universal scale. The same technology that had saved Earth now threatened reality itself. The tribunal had warned him. Doom stood once more at the edge of his laboratory, staring into projections of collapsing probability waves. "I have become what I swore to perfect," he whispered, "a flaw in the pattern." And so, as he had done countless times before, Victor von Doom prepared to face the consequences of his genius. He assembled a council of Earth's greatest minds, the descendants of Richards and Storm, the last of the Avengers, and even remnants of the X-Men, to discuss the fate of the universe. They begged him to shut the reactors down, but Doom refused. "This world runs on faith," he said. "If I dismantle it now, the structure collapses into chaos. I will find another way." Alone in his chamber, he contacted the tribunal once more. "If the universe must correct itself," he said into the void, "then let it correct me." For 3 days, the skies burned with auroras as energy arced from every reactor on Earth into the heavens. The world trembled, expecting apocalypse, but when the light faded, the stars shone brighter than before, the fractures sealed, and Doom stood upon his balcony once more, alive but changed. His armor was gone, replaced by robes of white and gold, and his voice carried through the air like resonance itself. "It is done," he said, "the balance restored. Humanity remains free." None could explain how he had done it. Some claimed he had bargained with eternity itself, others that he had become part of the universal frequency he once disrupted. All that was known was this: the universe had spared Doom, and the world had been spared with him. In the years that followed, people no longer called him Emperor. They called him the Architect. His face appeared on no currency, his name on no law. Yet his influence endured in every corner of civilization. Cities floated upon gravitic fields, diseases disappeared in light. Humanity had become what he always dreamed it could be: intelligent, disciplined, united. And though they did not see him often, they felt his presence in every hum of the reactors, in every sunrise reflected by clean air, in every whisper of peace that still carried the faint echo of his name. Doom had not ascended. He had simply learned to stand still at the center of creation, where will and consequence finally balanced. The universe had judged him, and he had passed, not through submission, but through understanding. And so the man who once sought to rule all existence became its quiet custodian, his empire no longer forged of steel or fear, but of symmetry, wisdom, and restraint. For the first time in eternity, Victor von Doom ruled nothing, and in that he ruled everything. Chapter 12. One World Under Doom. The sky over Earth changed forever the day the tribunal's judgment ended. A faint, shimmering band, what astronomers first mistook for residual aurora, circled the globe like a wound of light. The people called it Doom's Ring, a reminder of the night when humanity stood before cosmic judgment and survived. To most, it was a celestial curiosity, but to Victor von Doom, it was a warning. For months, he studied the anomaly in secret, scanning the atmospheric frequencies until he discovered something no telescope could perceive. The ring was alive. It pulsed faintly with psionic energy, resonating with the same harmonic frequency that his own Doom reactors emitted deep within the Earth. Every 71 hours, the pulse repeated, steady, mathematical, and familiar. It was, he realized, the heartbeat of the planet itself. For the first time in his reign as architect of Earth, Doom felt something he had not known since youth: uncertainty. The tribunal had claimed to restore balance, yet the rhythm he now detected suggested otherwise. The world was still tethered to his frequency, to the energy born of his technology and his will. Humanity's evolution had accelerated under Latverian science, but it had not matured. It had harmonized too easily. They learned to sing, he wrote in his private journals, but not to improvise. That thought troubled him more than the prospect of cosmic retribution. Across the globe, subtle anomalies began to emerge. People reported shared dreams, visions of glowing circuitry, of a white mask in a golden storm. Entire cities entered simultaneous reverie, their minds drifting into collective patterns. Psychics from Xavier's legacy confirmed what Doom already suspected. A psychic link had formed between the human population. It was not telepathy as the mutants knew it, but something deeper, an unconscious synchronization of thought and emotion, like a planetary nervous system awakening. The world was thinking as one, and the voice it spoke in felt suspiciously familiar. Doom confronted the possibility with dread and fascination. He had sought for decades to unite humanity through knowledge and structure, but he had never intended to bind them in spirit. The phenomenon was the unplanned consequence of his reactors, which had infused the planet with quantum coherence, a field amplifying will itself. The tribunal's warning echoed in his mind. The higher the order, the deeper the fall. If left unchecked, the psychic network would collapse under its own harmony, pulling consciousness into singularity. It would be peace eternal and death absolute. To address the crisis, Doom summoned the greatest remaining minds of Earth to Latveria. The gathering included the wizened Stephen Strange, the last descendant of the Richards line, a woman named Lyra Storm, Richards who bore both her ancestors' brilliance and their compassion, and Magneto's surviving followers who represented the remnants of mutant kind. They convened within the Crystal Hall of the Institute for the Advancement of Humanity, a chamber designed to neutralize psychic interference. Doom stood before them, his armor now silver, white, a reflection of his self-imposed neutrality. "The world dreams my dream," he said, "and it will destroy itself for it." Lyra Richards was the first to speak. "Then shut the reactors down." Doom's gaze met hers, and for a moment she saw in his eyes not arrogance, but exhaustion. "Would you have me kill the world to save it?" he asked. "Every cell, every breath depends on that energy. To silence it now would be mercy by annihilation." Strange nodded gravely. "Then you must unbind what you have bound. Create dissonance within the harmony before it becomes absolute." Doom turned toward the soul engine, long dormant since his last experiment with consciousness. "Then we must teach humanity to think again for itself." Thus began the Council of the Mind, the first and last of its kind, an alliance of sorcery, science, and psychic resonance dedicated to preserving individuality within the collective awakening. Doom modified the soul engine to act as a regulator rather than amplifier, channeling the psychic resonance of billions into manageable patterns. The process required linking the minds of every participant in the council, including Doom himself. For the first time, Victor Von Doom would share his consciousness completely with others. Strange hesitated. "If you do this," he warned, "you will no longer be alone in your thoughts. They will see you, all of you." Doom's response was quiet, "Then let them see." When the soul engine activated, light erupted from Doomstat like dawn breaking across eternity. Around the world, people froze mid-motion, their minds drawn upward into a single plane of shared awareness. The distinction between self and other dissolved. They saw through each other's eyes, felt each other's hearts, remembered each other's pains. In that instant, all hatred ceased, not because Doom commanded it, but because understanding replaced it. Every war, every sin, every cruelty became unbearable when shared by the victims and the perpetrators alike. The collective consciousness wept as one. Doom stood at its center, a living conduit between humanity and the quantum field. He felt their voices, billions of them, rushing through his mind like a river of stars. He saw their memories, their hopes, their trivial thoughts, their quiet kindnesses. He felt every doubt, every fear, every love. For the first time, the man who had sought to rule all life now carried it within him. The magnitude of it broke something in him and healed something else. So this, he thought, is what God feels when he hesitates. But the union could not last. The human mind, born for solitude, cannot bear infinite empathy. The harmony began to collapse into feedback. Pain surged through the network. Identity began to dissolve. Strange's voice echoed in the collective. "Doom, release them." But Doom hesitated. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, he saw what perfect unity could be. A species beyond conflict, beyond loneliness. He saw Reed Richards' dream fulfilled, his own ambition realized. And then he let it go. "No paradise without choice," he whispered and deactivated the engine. The world awoke with tears in its eyes. Days had passed, though it felt like moments. Across every nation, people emerged from the trance changed. Wars ended before they could begin. Old enemies embraced. Artists painted with colors no one could name. Philosophers wrote of a feeling they could not describe except as the presence of everyone. Humanity, for the first time, understood itself. The press called it the one-world epoch. Scientists could not explain it. Theologians called it ascension. Mutants called it evolution. Doom called it equilibrium. He withdrew from public view for months after the event. Reports claimed he was weakened, his body frail, his mind distant. Strange visited him and found him seated before the dormant soul engine, its lights dim to a heartbeat's pulse. "You did it," Strange said softly. "You gave them what they needed." Doom's voice was thin but steady. "I gave them what they were already becoming. I merely opened the door." Strange studied him. "And you, what did you see?" Doom turned his head slowly. "That even I am not separate." Lyra Richards visited soon after. "The world loves you," she told him. "They call you savior now." Doom chuckled weakly. "Then the world has learned nothing." She frowned. "Why do you always reject admiration?" His eyes softened. "Because admiration is submission in disguise." He rose with difficulty, walking toward the balcony where the first light of morning touched the city. "The true measure of my success will be the day they forget my name." As the years passed, Earth entered its golden era. No wars, no famine, no want. The memory of the collective unity became humanity's moral compass, passed from parent to child as dream and myth. The stars themselves seemed to brighten as if reflecting the consciousness of a world finally at peace. Yet Doom knew the balance was temporary. The tribunal's scar still glowed faintly above, a reminder that order and entropy forever danced together. In the twilight of his reign, Doom addressed the world one last time through the global harmonic network. His voice, calm and almost human, carried into every mind. "You have seen yourselves as one. Now learn to live as many. Diversity is not chaos. It is the universe remembering how to breathe. Protect it. Cherish it. And should you ever lose it, remember that you were once infinite together." Then the transmission ended. He retreated into solitude, leaving governance to the Council of Continuance and a democratic assembly guided by the principles of harmony and reason. The people called him the Eternal Steward, though no one knew where he lived. Some said he dwelled in the mountains of Transia, other that he wandered the stars as energy itself. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between myth and mathematics. Years later, when Strange wrote his final entry in the Book of the Vishanti, he dedicated it to his greatest adversary and most complex friend. Victor von Doom sought to rule men and found he could not. He sought to save them and learned they did not need him. In understanding both, he achieved what none of us could, peace between mind and will. And so ended the age of one world under Doom. It was not tyranny that defined it, nor even order, but a fleeting moment of universal empathy. The dream of a man who had conquered gods and galaxies only to discover that the truest victory was surrender. In the silence that followed, the world kept turning, its heartbeat steady beneath the faint shimmer of Doom's ring, pulsing in time with the rhythm of its people, as if the universe itself whispered softly through them all. We are one. Chapter 13. The Sorcerer King's Reign. In the years that followed the one world epoch, the earth slept beneath the watchful eye of Victor von Doom. The world had been unified, enlightened, and left to evolve freely, yet the scars of cosmic interference never truly faded. The tribunal's judgment had ended, but balance was never static. The universe demanded constant recalibration. Humanity's psychic awakening, though faded from memory, left traces, thin seams of energy that stretched between planes of existence. Strange weather patterns, spontaneous portals, and impossible phenomena began to emerge. The barriers between the physical and the mystical had weakened. It was not war or rebellion that called Doom back into action, but a whisper that rose from every corner of creation, a plea not from people, but from the earth itself. He began to sense it first in dreams, those rare moments when his mind was silent enough for the world to speak. He would find himself standing in endless white fields where shadows bled upward and voices murmured from the soil. They spoke of imbalance, of unseen hunger gnawing at the edges of reality. "You held them together," the voice said. but the seams remember being apart. Doom awoke with frost on his breath and runes etched faintly into his skin, ancient symbols of protection and binding. He recognized them. They were Mephisto's marks. The devil had returned. The equilibrium between Earth's psychic field and the infernal realms had begun to collapse. Every act of empathy born from the one-world epoch had weakened the boundaries that kept hell contained. Billions of human souls, once isolated in selfishness, now vibrated with shared resonance. And that resonance was nourishment to what waited below. Mephisto had been patient, observing Doom's experiment from the shadows, and now he sought to reclaim his tithe. "You have built a heaven," he whispered through the flames of every dying candle, "and heaven requires a hell." Doom knew the meaning of that message, for he had already walked the infernal roads once before. Decades ago, he had descended with Doctor Strange to rescue his mother's soul from eternal torment. And he had learned then that hell was not merely a place, it was a contract. Every pact, every oath, every unchecked ambition written into the fabric of creation had an infernal echo. Humanity's collective empathy had written a new contract without realizing it, one that threatened to unmake the order Doom had built. The universe was becoming too merciful, and in cosmic law, mercy without balance invited annihilation. And so, as the mystic storms rose and the skies darkened red with auroral flame, Doom did what he had always done. He took responsibility for what others feared to confront. The Sorcerer Supreme, now aged and diminished, sought to intervene, but his strength had waned. Stephen Strange arrived at Castle Doom to find the monarch standing before a mirror of liquid silver, his reflection flickering between man and spirit. "You mean to enter again," Strange said quietly. Doom did not turn. "There are debts," he replied. "Debts the world does not remember, but Doom does, and only Doom can pay them." With a gesture, he opened a rift between realms, the veil tearing like fabric soaked in fire, and stepped into the infernal dimension. The descent was as endless as memory. Cities of bone stretched beneath him, rivers of molten souls screamed in harmonic agony, and above it all, Mephisto waited on a throne of teeth and ash. "Welcome home, Victor," the demon said, his grin wide as eternity. "How long has it been since you last begged me for a soul?" Doom's answer was calm, almost weary. "Too long for you to remember mercy, and too short for me to forget vengeance." What followed was not battle in the mortal sense, but negotiation in the language of gods. Doom and Mephisto spoke in truths and contracts, each word reshaping the realm around them. For every accusation of pride, Doom countered with proof of sacrifice. For every temptation of power, he offered understanding. "You claim dominion over sin," he said, "yet you forget it was man's will that gave you form. You're not ruler of the damned, you are their reflection, and reflections can be rewritten." When Mephisto struck, it was with legions of shadow made from Doom's past sins, every betrayal, every corpse, every failure. Doom fought not with armor or science, but with words of power and equations of intent. His sorcery had evolved beyond chant or gesture. It was the fusion of formula and faith, logic and light. Each spell he cast was a theorem of redemption, every shield a proof of compassion learned through suffering. Mephisto screamed as the battlefield itself bent under Doom's redefinition. For the first time, hell trembled under the weight of human will purified by reason. Doom's victory was not conquest but compromise. He forged a new covenant, the Latverian Concordat, binding the infernal realms not by fear, but by equilibrium. No longer would souls be damned by ignorance or saved by grace. They would be weighed by intent, a balance of consequence and will. Mephisto, bound by his own pride, agreed, for even devils respect precision. "You have made hell rational," the demon hissed. Doom replied, "I have made it fair." When Doom emerged from the rift, the world greeted him not as emperor or scientist, but as something greater, the Sorcerer King. His armor shimmered with sigils of containment, his eyes reflecting the pale green of eldritch flame. Strange, witnessing the transformation, bowed, not out of submission, but recognition. "You've done what none of us could, Malan," he said. You've rewritten the rules. Doom shook his head. No, Stephen, I've merely reminded the universe that rules exist. The years that followed became legend. Under Doom's guidance, the balance between magic and science was restored. The study of the arcane entered mainstream academia. Latveria's universities taught quantum theurgy alongside engineering, and every nation adopted Doom's revised metaphysical charter, a codex that prevented unlicensed summoning, time manipulation, and necromantic interference. The planet's ley lines stabilized, glowing faintly under the night sky, visible from orbit as a web of living light. The Sorcerer King had turned Earth itself into a sigil of protection. Yet even in victory, Doom felt the quiet approach of exhaustion. He had transcended monarch and man alike. He had balanced heaven and hell. But in doing so, he had removed himself from everything human. His people worshipped him now as myth, not leader. Temples dedicated to reason and will replaced churches, their altars adorned with the symbol of his mask, half in shadow, half in flame. It was not idolatry born of fear, but of gratitude. And that, he realized, was the cruelest prison of all. He visited Strange one final time, high in the Sanctum Sanctorum where the stars bent through stained glass. The old sorcerer was frail, his hands trembling, but his eyes still sharp. "The world is safe," Strange said. "You should rest." Doom looked out at the city below, shimmering with lights powered by his own creations. "Rest is for those who forget their purpose," he said. "I have seen what lies beyond the balance, Stephen. The universe is not infinite, it is recursive. Perfection folds back upon itself until it decays." Strange smiled faintly. "Then let it decay. You've earned the right to stop fighting." Doom's answer was almost a whisper. "If I stop, who will remind the universe to begin again?" In his later years, Doom spent less time in Latveria and more in the void between worlds, studying the edges of existence where thought and matter intertwined. He communed with entities beyond mortal comprehension, the Vishanti, eternity, even death herself. To death, he said, "You have followed me all my life. Tell me what remains that I have not already taken from you." And death, who had loved few mortals enough to answer, replied, "The one thing you cannot claim, peace." When he returned to Earth, centuries had passed by mortal reckoning, yet only days to him. The world still thrived, guided by the equilibrium he had set. Strange was long gone, his successors maintaining the balance. Latveria had become a city of light, suspended above its old ruins, its people living in harmony with machines that no longer obeyed but cooperated. Doom found himself unneeded yet remembered. Children learned his name as parable, not command. He walked among them unseen, and when they laughed, he almost smiled. In the chronicles of the Vishanti, they call this period the era of the Sorcerer King, a time when the borders between science and magic dissolved, when the earth stood as the axis of order in a chaotic cosmos. It was a golden age measured not by power but by comprehension. And at its center stood a man who had once believed he could own the world, now content to merely understand it. But legends, even those written in light, must fade. As the centuries waned, Doom began to feel the slow unraveling of his essence. The equilibrium he had maintained for so long began to shift again. New minds, new wills, new forms of life emerged, beings born of his own legacy, questioning whether the balance he imposed should endure forever. For the first time, Doom did not resist the challenge. Perhaps, he mused, it is time the universe learned to rewrite itself. In his final act as Sorcerer King, Doom convened the Concordat of Creation, a council of sorcerers, scientists, and cosmic beings to whom he entrusted the stewardship of reality itself. He left them with a single decree. The world is not a problem to be solved, it is a lesson to be learned endlessly. Then he vanished, leaving no trace but a single inscription carved into the obsidian floor of his last chamber. Balance is not stillness, it is motion understood. And so ended the reign of the Sorcerer King, without death, without ascension, only transformation. The man who once ruled by fear had become the principle by which worlds found peace. And though centuries passed, and even the stars that once bore witness burned out, the echo of his final truth remained in the hum of magic and machine alike. There is no order without understanding. There is no doom without compassion. Chapter 14, Doom Eternal. There is a silence that comes at the end of all empires, a silence not of defeat but of completion. For Victor von Doom, that silence was not death but transformation. Centuries after his last act as Sorcerer King, the Earth had become something entirely different, a world of light and equilibrium, a nexus where science and sorcery, matter and spirit, technology and intention all coexisted seamlessly. The descendants of his students and rivals called it the unified plane, a civilization that no longer knew hunger, hatred, or fear. Humanity had learned not merely to survive, but to harmonize, to think in the language of creation itself. And at the foundation of it all, woven through every law, every equation, every spell, was doom. Not as ruler, not as God, but as the architecture of reason, the invisible constant that held the universe steady. His name was no longer spoken in reverence or fear, it was simply understood. Legends say that in those final centuries, Doom no longer walked the earth as a man. His body, sustained by both the science of immortality and the magic of eternity, had become translucent, his armor reduced to a thin lattice of light and memory. He no longer required sustenance nor rest. His voice, when he chose to speak, resonated like the hum of distant machinery. The world's archives record that his presence could bend probability, the flutter of his cloak capable of stabilizing quantum storms, his gaze alone able to calm chaos. He was not omnipotent, merely inevitable, a principle given shape. Yet Doom, in his infinite awareness, sensed the slow entropy of perfection. The world had become static, untroubled, efficient, and that to him was the true death of civilization. In perfection, there was no longer curiosity, no longer striving. Even knowledge, his greatest gift, had lost its urgency. The Council of Continuance, still guiding humanity under his ancient decree, had grown into a circle of philosophers who debated balance endlessly but achieved nothing new. They worshipped equilibrium as an end in itself, forgetting that Doom had taught it as a means to evolution. They have mistaken peace for purpose, he wrote in his final record. They have forgotten that order is not the goal, but the moment before creation. It was then that Doom began his last great work, the Transcension Project, an attempt not to control, but to liberate reality itself from stasis. His plan was as audacious as any in his long life, to merge his consciousness with the fundamental structure of the universe, to become not God or king, but the principle of renewal. Entropy is necessary, he declared before the council, but it must be understood, not feared. I will become the motion between stillness and decay. I will become the voice that reminds existence to change. Many begged him not to proceed. Lyra Storm Richards, now ancient and wise, confronted him in the crystal halls of New Doomstadt. You've done enough, she pleaded. The universe doesn't need another savior. It needs time to make its own mistakes. Doom regarded her with eyes that no longer reflected light. Then let me give it the chance to err without collapse. She stepped closer. And if this destroys you? Doom's answer was the same as it had been since his youth. Then let it. The preparation lasted decades. Doom constructed the Axis Mundi, a colossal spire built at the intersection of every ley line and gravitational field on Earth. It reached beyond the atmosphere into the shimmering edge of space where physics blurred into abstraction. At its summit burned a sphere of energy, a fusion of cosmic radiation, dark matter, and the soul engine he had once used to unify mankind. Its pulse matched the rhythm of Doom's ring in the sky. Standing beneath it, he spoke softly to the empty air. For all that I have built, he said, for all that I have become, I remain a man seeking to understand why. The ceremony of ascension was witnessed by billions. No armies, no crowns, no ceremonies of faith, only silence and expectation. Doom ascended the Axis Mundi alone, his cloak trailing behind him like a comet's tail. He paused halfway, turning to gaze at the world below, the cities of glass, the oceans that shimmered with life, the skies free of storm. "You no longer need me," he said. "That is why I must remain." Then he raised his hands and the universe listened. The energy enveloped him, layer by layer, consuming metal, flesh, thought. His armor dissolved into light, his voice became vibration, his consciousness expanded outward until the limits of self ceased to exist. He saw time not as sequence but as tapestry, every moment overlapping every other. He saw his life in all directions, child, tyrant, savior, scholar, monster, and understood that they were all necessary, all true. He had never been one man, he had always been all of them. As the sphere consumed him, he whispered the words that would be his last and his eternal. "Let there be no gods, let there be doom." For a brief instant, every star in the galaxy dimmed, as if the cosmos itself had bowed its head. The pulse of the universe slowed, then quickened again, different now, more alive. The axis mundi vanished, leaving in its place a single thread of radiant light stretching from Earth to the heavens. And in the silence that followed, the world heard a sound, a low, harmonic hum that resonated in the bones of every living thing. It was not language but meaning. It said, "Change is balance. Balance is life." From that moment onward, reality itself bore Doom's imprint. His consciousness had fused with the cosmic field, becoming the unseen symmetry that guided galaxies and governed laws of cause and consequence. The living tribunal, now silent for eons, recorded the event in the universal ledger as the integration of Doom. "One mind has chosen to become principle," it wrote. "It no longer seeks to rule or defy, but to remind." The celestials, upon observing the shift, knelt, not in worship, but in acknowledgement. "The man who would be God," they said, "has become truth." Centuries passed. New civilizations rose on Earth and beyond. The descendants of humankind spread across the stars, their ships powered by energy derived from what they called the eternal equation, the same harmonics Doom had left behind. They no longer prayed to him, but to the principle he represented, will through understanding. Entire philosophies, sciences, and religions arose from the fragments of his teachings. Some claimed to hear his voice in the quiet between worlds, whispering through static or starlight. Others believed he lived within the mathematics of existence itself, a divine geometry hidden in every atom. On Latveria's soil, now overgrown and wild, the ruins of Castle Doom still stood. Scholars who visited the site reported that their instruments malfunctioned, their compasses spinning wildly as if confused by an unseen presence. At night, under the pale shimmer of Doom's ring, still faintly visible in the atmosphere, travelers swore they heard footsteps echoing through the marble halls. When they called out, the air would hum, and a voice would answer, not aloud but within their thoughts. "Seek knowledge. Fear nothing. Strive always." And though his body was gone, Doom's influence endured in the smallest of gestures. When a child reached for a book instead of a weapon, when a scientist sought truth instead of fame, when a leader chose reason over power, somewhere in the quantum weave, the fabric of the universe responded, ever so faintly, with resonance. A pulse like a heartbeat, a whisper like breath. Doom approves. Even eternity itself, the personification of all reality, acknowledged his transformation. In the annals of infinity, the event is recorded simply, Victor von Doom ceased to exist. Doom remains. The universe, now subtly self-correcting, no longer required divine oversight. Entropy and creation danced in perfect rhythm, each giving rise to the other as they always had, but now with intention. It was as if a consciousness guided the cycle from within, not as ruler but as conscience. In the farthest reaches of the multiverse, in realities born after the fall of the old, new heroes spoke of an unseen architect, an intelligence woven into the laws of nature that whispered when balance was threatened. The Sorcerer Supreme called it the Silent One. The scientists of the Future Foundation called it the Equation. But among those who still remembered history, who still studied the myth of the man who had challenged gods, conquered hell, and united humanity, The name endured, spoken softly, almost reverently, as though to speak it too loudly would awaken the universe itself. Doom eternal. He had not sought divinity, yet he had found something. Greater continuity. He had not destroyed ego, but transcended it, spreading it thin across the fabric of everything until it no longer ruled, only resonated. His last act was not conquest, not salvation, but completion. The story of Victor von Doom ended where it had begun, with a man standing before the unknown, unafraid to demand understanding from the infinite. And if, on some distant night when stars flare and the cosmos hums with invisible harmony, one listens closely, one might hear it still. The faint echo of that final vow, woven forever into the heartbeat of creation. Let there be no gods, let there be doom, and begins to terrify. When that moment arrives, remember that to seek understanding is to love the universe more than it deserves. The archivists debated for centuries who had written it, until one day a researcher discovered its energy signature matched that of the Axis Mundi, the site where doom had transcended. From then on, no one questioned the authorship again. As humanity and its descendants expanded beyond the Milky Way, new forms of life emerged, beings of energy and thought, the children of both technology and will. They too felt the influence of the principle. They experienced dreams, rare and inexplicable visions of a figure in emerald and silver, standing in a storm of stars, his voice deep as gravity itself. "You are not my creation," he would tell them, "you are my continuation." These entities came to call themselves the lineage of doom, not as cult, but as philosophy. They believed every act of creation was a moral responsibility, every thought a potential universe. They sought to preserve the balance between innovation and reverence, between progress and humility. And though they claimed no God, they whispered his name when they feared the dark between galaxies. Meanwhile, in realms beyond physical existence, the cosmic entities themselves, eternity, infinity, death, and even the remnants of the tribunal, acknowledged the permanence of what doom had become. "He is not among us," death said once to eternity. "He is within us." The tribunal, whose function had always been to weigh reality against itself, found its task diminished. Judgment had become unnecessary. The universe now balanced instinctively, self-regulating through an underlying will. "We have been replaced," the tribunal said without sorrow. "The equation judges itself." On one distant world orbiting a dying sun, an archaeologist uncovered a fragment of the old Earth, an artifact encased in obsidian, unaged by time. Within it rested the mask of doom. Its surface was smooth, reflective, neither corroded nor decayed. When touched, it vibrated faintly, as if alive. The archaeologist recorded a single note. "The mask hums when held near the heart. I believe it listens." When news of the discovery spread, millions made pilgrimages to see it. Some knelt in reverence, others in study, but all left with the same inexplicable sense of being observed, not judged, not blessed, but acknowledged. The mask was returned to the Eternal Archive, where it was placed at the center of a vast hall lined with symbols of mathematics, magic, and art, all languages doom had once mastered, now understood as one. Over time, a new religion arose, not of worship, but remembrance. Its followers were called the Keepers of Continuity. They taught that the principle of doom was not to be adored, but emulated. To live by doom, they preached, is to seek understanding before judgment, discipline before desire, truth before comfort. Their creed spread not through conquest, but through resonance, carried in music, architecture, and even genetics. Entire species encoded the harmonic ratio of doom's frequency into their DNA, believing it brought stability of mind. Whether by coincidence or by design, civilizations that aligned themselves with this principle thrived longer and fell less violently than others. The multiverse itself seemed to favor balance once taught by the man who had refused chaos. And yet, even this legacy was not immutable. As eons passed and stars aged, cracks began to appear in the great calm. The principle that had preserved creation began to falter, not from malice, but from completion. The universe had learned too well. Change had slowed again. Entropy once more threatened to stagnate, and so, in the last era of measurable time, the descendants of humanity turned to the eternal archive, seeking guidance from the wisdom of their oldest teacher. Deep within its core, beneath layers of protective algorithms, they found a message encoded in quantum resonance, a voice speaking from beyond matter. It was doom. The message was not prophecy nor command, but invitation. "You have balanced too well," it said. "You have forgotten the joy of imperfection. Break the symmetry. Build anew. Let the universe make mistakes again and learn from them. That is my final gift to you." Obeying his words, the civilizations of the Federation began a great unbinding. They dismantled the old technologies, allowed entropy to return, permitted chance and chaos to breathe once more. The stars grew wild again, unpredictable. New species evolved, uncontrolled by perfect design. For the first time in billions of years, laughter was heard in laboratories, arguments in temples, failures celebrated as discovery. The cosmos bloomed anew, full of uncertainty and life. The last record of this age ends with a single entry from an anonymous historian written in a tone more prayer than prose. "He is gone, and yet he remains. Every atom hums his name, every thought echoes his law. He taught us that perfection is not peace, but pause. And so long as we seek, we honor him. Doom is not gone, doom is curiosity eternal." Somewhere beyond time, where even eternity has no dominion, the faint hum of the cosmos continues. It is the same rhythm that once beat in the heart of a man from Latveria, a man who sought to rule the world, then to save it, then to understand it. He became the measure by which all will is weighed, the bridge between arrogance and awe. And though his face is no longer remembered, his presence is in every act of reason, every spark of rebellion against ignorance, every soul that dares to ask why. For as long as there are minds to question and stars to answer, there will be doom. And in the silence after the final word of creation, when the universe folds upon itself and prepares to begin again, one whisper will spark the next dawn of existence. Let there be no gods. Let there be doom.